Okay, this will be the last lecture for the week 1, lecture 1. And this is all about using significant figures in calculations themselves. Before we begin, I'd like to take a minute to look at this person's scientific notation. Before we talked about scientific notation, I said to look for the EE or EXP button. If you still couldn't find it, here's one on their calculation. Sometimes it'll be written up here as a second function. So if you're still having problems finding it, please let somebody know and we can help you. Okay, with significant figures, we already talked about if it was a leading zero, they don't count, and if it's a trailing zero without a decimal, they don't count. With a decimal, they do. All the other numbers count. But let's say your calculator gives you this number. However, you've determined that you only need 3 significant figures. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the first 3 numbers, 8.42, and that's going to be your final answer. If it was 2 significant figures, it would only be 8.4, and that would be your final answer. So, for instance, if we take 14.780, and that's our number in our calculator, and we only need 3 of them, that'd be 14.8. However, if we need 2, that 7 rounds that 4 up to a 15. And finally, we have 3,256. Now, these get tricky because if we just take the first 3 numbers, we have 326. We don't have anything there. That doesn't count. So we need to figure out how to make sure that we have 3 significant figures, yet still have the same value rounded off. 326 is not anything near 3,256. So there's a couple different ways to do that. You can either change this 6 to a 0, or you can put in scientific notation. When you see scientific notation, every single one of those numbers count. You take the first part of it. If we needed 2 numbers, that 5 rounds that 2 up, so it would be 33. And we can do 33 and change these 2 to zeros, or we can do 3.3 times 10 to the third. And we get the third by going 1, 2, 3. So if we're taking 3.4157 grams, and we need 3 significant figures, take the first 3 numbers. The next number is a 5, so that rounds the 4 up to a 5, 3.15 grams. If we only needed 2 significant figures, it would just be 3.1. It's just a 4, so the 1 doesn't get rounded up. Okay, so now we're talking about rules for multiplying and dividing and adding and subtracting. There's actually 2 sets of rules. Multiplying and dividing is actually the easier of the 2. All you have to do is look at each of the numbers individually and determine which has fewer significant figures in the calculation. So, we have 4 significant figures here. The leading 0 doesn't count, so we only have 2 here. Whichever one is fewer is how many you're going to have in the answer. So 24.66 times 0.35, this is what we get in our calculator. We look at 4 and 2, 2 is less, so that's how many digits we want in our answer. Another example, we have 3 significant figures here. Leading 0 doesn't count, trailing 0, but it has a decimal, so that means we have 2, and we have 3 here. So 21.5 times 0.3 divided by 1.88, that's going to give us this big long number here. Instead of writing that whole big long number out, we want to round it off to our correct significant figures. We have 3's and a 2. 2 is the smallest, so we want the first 2 numbers. That's how we get 3.4. Alright, I'll give you a second to put this into your calculator. you should come out to be 8.52 centimeters. We have 3 significant figures here, 4 significant figures here, and 3 here. There's trailing zeros here, but we have decimals, so they count. We have trailing zeros here, but we have a decimal, so they count. No trailing or leading zeros here, so all of them count. We want all 3 of these numbers in our answer. Adding and subtracting is a bit more difficult. That's mainly because you have to analyze each of the numbers individually as far as their place value is concerned, rather than just simply saying how many significant figures there are. Notice that the decimal place is lined up. The easiest way to go about doing this is if you look at each number individually from left to right, and you underline the last number that's significant. So 2.012, this last 2 is the last significant figure in that particular number. 61.09, the 9 is the last significant figure in that particular number, and 3.0. You want to compare all 3 of these at the same time. Whichever one ends first from left to right, so we have the 0, the 9, and the 2, the 0 stops first. So that is where we're going to cut off the number. So the 66.102 rounds off to 66.1. Another example. Okay, first of all, let's do the math. 104.409. That's really sloppy. Look at the numbers individually. The 9 is the last significant figure here. 0 is here. So we want to cut it off where that 0 is. So it would be 104.4. That is the end of the first lecture. And the next lecture we'll start with conversions.